Eleanor Hartwell stepped down from the dusty stagecoach and looked around Cedar Ridge, Montana. The town was smaller than she had hoped. Much smaller. Wooden buildings lined the dirt road, and dust blew everywhere in the hot summer wind. She picked up her two small bags and walked toward the hotel. The year was 1885, and Eleanor had traveled all the way from Boston to teach school in this frontier town. She was 28 years old, which most people back home said was too old to be unmarried. Her family had made it clear that they were tired of supporting a spinster daughter. Teaching was her only choice to make her own way in the world. Eleanor had brown hair that she kept in a neat bun and kind green eyes behind wire glasses. She was not tall or short, not beautiful or plain. She was the kind of woman who worked hard and minded her own business. Back in Boston, that had not been enough to find a husband. Here in Montana, she hoped it would be enough to keep a job. The hotel clerk looked at her with doubt when she asked for a room. "You the new teacher?" he asked. "Yes, I am, Miss Eleanor Hartwell." The man shook his head. "Town council's been having meetings about money. School might not open this year. Parents can't pay much and the town's got no extra funds." Eleanor's heart sank, but she tried not to show it. She had spent most of her savings on the train ticket and stagecoach ride. If there was no teaching job, she had no idea what she would do. The next morning, Eleanor walked to the small schoolhouse on the edge of town. It needed paint and repairs. Inside, dust covered everything. She spent the day cleaning and trying to make the place look ready for children, even though she was not sure any would come. At noon, she walked to the general store to buy supplies. The store was busy with ranch hands and townspeople getting their weekly goods. Eleanor was looking at fabric when she heard a commotion outside. "Someone help. Tom's hurt bad." Eleanor looked out the window and saw two men helping a third man down from a horse. The injured man's leg was bleeding through torn pants, and his face was white with pain. Without thinking, Eleanor rushed outside. She had helped care for her sick mother for years before she died. She knew something about treating wounds. "Bring him inside the store," she said. "Put him on that bench by the window where there's good light." The men looked surprised, but did as she said. Eleanor knelt beside the injured man and carefully looked at his leg. A piece of wood had cut deep into his thigh, but it had missed the big blood vessels. "I need clean cloth, hot water, and whiskey," she told the store owner. While she waited, she talked quietly to the hurt man. "What's your name?" "Tom Wilson, miss. I work for Mr. McKinnon's ranch." "Well, Tom, you're going to be fine. This cut looks bad, but I've seen worse." Eleanor cleaned the wound carefully and bandaged it tight. She had Tom drink some whiskey for the pain and told the men how to care for the wound so it would heal properly. A crowd had gathered to watch. In a small town, any excitement drew people like bees to honey. Eleanor was so busy helping Tom that she did not notice the very large man who had pushed through the crowd to see what was happening. When she finally stood up and brushed dust from her skirt, she looked around and froze. The biggest man she had ever seen was staring down at her. He was at least 6 feet and 8 inches tall, with shoulders as wide as a door. His hands looked like they could crush rocks, but his eyes were gentle, like a dog who wanted to be petted. "That was good work, miss," he said in a deep voice that rumbled like distant thunder. "Tom's one of my best men. Anyone would have done." "The same," Eleanor replied, suddenly aware that everyone in the store was listening to their conversation. The giant man smiled. "No, most people would have stood around talking while he bled. You jumped right in to help." He held out one massive hand. "I'm Jeremiah McKinnon, but folks call me Bear. I own the big ranch south of town." Eleanor shook his hand, amazed that he was so gentle despite his size. "Eleanor Hartwell, I'm the new teacher, or I was supposed to be." "Supposed to be? The school might not open. Money troubles." Bear nodded slowly, thinking. Then he looked around at all the people watching them and made a decision that would change both their lives. "Miss Hartwell," he said in his loud, deep voice that filled the store, "I need a wife and you need strong sons. I have a good ranch, plenty of money, and a house that's too quiet. You have gentle hands and a kind heart. What do you say to marrying me?" The store went completely silent. Eleanor's face turned red as a tomato. She could not believe what she had just heard. This giant of a man who she had known for exactly 5 minutes was asking her to marry him in front of half the town. "Mr. McKinnon, I don't," she started to say, but words would not come. "I know it sounds sudden," Bear continued, not seeming to notice that everyone was staring with their mouths open. "But I've been thinking about this for a long time. I need a family and I can give you security. We could help each other." Old Mrs. Peterson from the boarding house spoke up. "Bear McKinnon, you can't just ask a lady to marry you like you're buying a horse." Bear looked confused. "Why not? Makes sense to me. I need a wife to cook and keep house and give me children. She needs a home and someone to take care of her. Seems like a fair trade." Eleanor finally found her voice. "Mr. McKinnon, marriage is not a business deal. People get married because they love each other. Love comes later," Bear said simply. "My parents married for practical reasons and loved each other for 40 years. My grandmother always said the best marriages start with respect and common sense." Eleanor looked around at all the faces watching this strange conversation. Some people looked shocked, others seemed amused, and a few nodded like they thought Bear was making sense. "I need time to think," she said quietly. "Of course," Bear replied. "Take all the time you need. But remember, winter comes early here and you'll need somewhere warm to spend it." With that, he touched his hat politely and walked out of the store, leaving Eleanor standing there with her mouth open and 30 people staring at her with great interest. The store buzzed with talk as soon as Bear was gone. Eleanor grabbed her small package of supplies and hurried back to her hotel room, her mind spinning with confusion and something that might have been possibility. 3 days later, Eleanor walked to the small white church at the end of Cedar Ridge's main street. Her hands shook as she knocked on the door of the preacher's house next to the church. Preacher Morrison answered the door. He was a thin man with kind eyes and gray hair. "Miss Hartwell, come in, come in. Bear McKinnon said you might be stopping by." Eleanor sat down in the preacher's small parlor and twisted her hands in her lap. "I've been thinking about Mr. McKinnon's proposal, and I think I want to say yes. But I want to talk to you first, to make sure I understand what I'm agreeing to." Preacher Morrison nodded. "That's wise. Marriage is a serious step, especially when you don't know each other well. Is it wrong to marry someone for practical reasons instead of love?" The preacher thought about this. "Many good marriages start with practical arrangements. Love can grow from respect and kindness, but both people have to be willing to work at it. What do you think of Mr. McKinnon?" "Bear's a good man. He's honest, he works hard, and he treats people fairly. He's been lonely since his parents died, 5 years ago. That big ranch is too quiet for one person. Why hasn't he married before now?" Preacher Morrison smiled sadly. "His size scares some people, and he's not smooth with words like some men, but I've never known him to be anything but gentle." Eleanor made her decision. "Will you marry us? If you're both sure that's what you want." That evening, Eleanor walked to the hotel restaurant where she had arranged to meet Bear for dinner. He was waiting at a corner table, looking uncomfortable, in the small chair. He stood up when he saw her, and Eleanor realized all over again how enormous he was. "Good evening, Miss Hartwell." "Good evening, Mr. McKinnon. I've made my decision." Bear's face went very still. "And? Yes, I'll marry you." For a moment, Bear just stared at her. Then a slow smile spread across his face, and Eleanor realized he was actually quite handsome when he smiled. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I promise I'll do my best to be a good husband. And I'll try to be a good wife." They talked about practical things during dinner. Bear explained that his ranch was about 5 miles south of town. He had a housekeeper who came twice a week, but mostly he took care of himself. The house had 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a parlor with a piano. "You play piano?" Eleanor asked, surprised. "My mother taught me. I'm not very good, but it helps pass long winter evenings." Eleanor smiled. "I play a little too. My mother insisted on music lessons. Then we'll have music in the house again." They agreed to be married in 1 week, giving Eleanor time to prepare and bare time to get the house ready for a wife. The wedding day came faster than Eleanor expected. She wore her best dress, a dark blue silk that her mother had given her. She had no family present, but several townspeople came to watch, mostly out of curiosity. Bear stood at the front of the church wearing a black suit that looked like it had been made special for his large frame. His hair was neatly combed and he had shaved carefully. Eleanor thought he looked nervous but determined. Preacher Morrison kept the ceremony short and simple. When it came time for Bear to put the ring on Eleanor's finger, his hands shook slightly. The ring was a simple gold band that fit perfectly. "You may kiss the bride," Preacher Morrison said. Bear looked down at Eleanor uncertainly. She stood on her toes and he bent down and they shared a brief, gentle kiss that made Eleanor's heart flutter unexpectedly. After the ceremony, Bear helped Eleanor into his wagon for the ride to the ranch. Her few belongings were packed in the back. As they drove away from town, Eleanor felt scared and excited at the same time. "Nervous?" Bear asked. "A little. Me too." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, enjoying the beautiful Montana landscape. Rolling hills covered with grass stretched in every direction, and mountains rose in the distance like purple giants. "There it is," Bear said, finally pointing ahead. Eleanor looked and saw a large house made of stone and wood, with a wide porch across the front. Barns and other buildings were scattered around it, and cattle grazed in nearby fields. Smoke rose from the chimney and flowers grew in boxes under the windows. "It's beautiful," Eleanor said, and meant it. "Maria, my housekeeper, came today to clean everything and cook supper. She's excited to meet you." Bear lifted Eleanor down from the wagon as easily as if she weighed nothing. A small Mexican woman came out of the house, smiling widely. "Señora McKinnon, welcome, welcome." Maria hugged Eleanor warmly. "I am so happy Bear finally has a wife." Eleanor felt strange being called Mrs. McKinnon, but also pleased. Bear carried her bags into the house and showed her around. The rooms were larger than she expected, with good furniture and pretty curtains. The kitchen had a big stove and running water from a pump. The parlor had the piano Bear had mentioned, along with comfortable chairs and shelves full of books. "You read a lot," Eleanor observed. "Gets lonely here. Books are good company." Bear showed her to a bedroom upstairs. "This is yours," he said. "I'm in the room next door. We should get to know each other first." Eleanor felt grateful for his consideration. "That's thoughtful of you. There's a lock on the door if it makes you feel safer." Eleanor looked at this giant man who was now her husband and realized she wasn't afraid of him. "I don't think I'll need the lock." That evening they had dinner by candlelight. Maria had cooked roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread. Bear was quiet at first, but gradually began talking about the ranch and his plans for expanding the cattle herd. "Do you miss Boston?" he asked. "Some things, but not as much as I thought I would." "What do you miss?" Eleanor thought about it. "The library, the museum, being able to walk to shops and restaurants. I could take you to Helena sometime. It's a bigger city, about a day's ride north. They have shops, and even an opera house." Eleanor smiled. "I'd like that." After dinner, Bear played the piano while Eleanor listened. He was better than he claimed, and the music filled the house with warmth. "Play something you know," Bear said, getting up from the bench. Eleanor sat down and played a song her mother had taught her. Bear listened with his eyes closed, and when she finished, he opened them and smiled. "Beautiful. The house hasn't had music in too long." Later, as Eleanor got ready for bed in her new room, she looked out the window at the star-filled sky. Where ranch was so quiet compared to the city. She could hear wind in the grass and cattle moving in distant fields. A soft knock came at her door. "Eleanor, are you all right?" "Yes, I'm fine. Good night then." "Good night, Bear." Eleanor smiled at how careful he was being with her. As she settled into the comfortable bed, she realized that for the first time in months, she felt safe. This marriage might be strange, but at least she had a home now. Outside her window, an owl called softly. and Eleanor fell asleep to the peaceful sounds of her new life. Eleanor could not sleep that night. She sat by her small hotel window, looking out at the quiet street and thinking about Bear McKinnon's strange proposal. The man was clearly crazy. Who asked someone to marry them after knowing them for 5 minutes? But as the hours passed, Eleanor had to admit that her situation was becoming desperate. She had counted her money 3 times. After paying for the hotel room and buying a few supplies, she had less than $20 left. That would last maybe 2 weeks if she was very careful. The next morning, she walked to the schoolhouse again, hoping to find some way to make things work. Maybe she could convince parents to pay a little for their children's education, even if the town could not help. She was sweeping the front steps when a woman approached. The lady was well-dressed and looked angry. "Are you the teacher?" the woman asked. "Yes, I'm Eleanor Hartwell. I'm Mrs. Adams. My husband is on the town council." The woman looked Eleanor up and down like she was inspecting a horse. "I heard about yesterday's spectacle at the general store." Eleanor's face grew warm. "If you mean Mr. McKinnon's proposal, yes, that happened. That man has been bothering every unmarried woman in this town for 2 years, Mrs. Adams said, with a sniff. He thinks he can buy a wife like he buys cattle. 3 women have already left town because of his attention. He seemed polite enough to me." Mrs. Adams laughed, but it was not a nice sound. "Polite? He's a giant who lives alone on that ranch like some kind of wild man. People say he talks to his horses more than to people. And that proposal of his, asking for strong sons like you're some kind of breeding animal." Eleanor felt her temper rise. She did not like Bear's proposal, but she liked Mrs. Adams even less. What he said may have been forward, but he was not cruel about it. "You can't be serious about considering his offer." "I haven't decided anything yet." Mrs. Adams shook her head. "Well, you should know that decent people in this town would not approve. And about the teaching position. The council voted last night. There's no money for a school this year. Maybe next year, if things improve." With that, Mrs. Adams walked away, leaving Eleanor standing alone in front of the empty schoolhouse. Eleanor felt like crying, but she had learned long ago that tears did not solve problems. She walked back toward town, trying to think of what to do next. She passed the bank and saw a sign in the window that said, "Help wanted. Woman to cook and clean." Eleanor went inside to ask about the job. The banker, Mr. Foster, looked up from his desk. "The position pays $8 a month plus meals. You'd live in the back room and work 6 days a week." $8 a month was barely enough to survive, and living in the back of a bank did not sound pleasant. But Eleanor was running out of choices. "I'll consider it," she told Mr. Foster. "Better decide quick. 2 other women already asked about it." Eleanor left the bank feeling even more worried. As she walked down the main street, she saw Bear McKinnon coming out of the blacksmith shop. He was even bigger than she remembered, but he tipped his hat politely when he saw her. "Good morning, Miss Hartwell. Have you thought about my offer?" "Mr. McKinnon, your proposal yesterday was very unexpected. I know it was sudden, but I meant every word." He looked around and lowered his voice. "Would you walk with me? People are watching, and this is private business." Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. They walked slowly toward the edge of town, away from curious eyes and listening ears. "Why me?" Eleanor asked. "You don't know anything about me." Bear was quiet, for a moment choosing his words carefully. "I saw how you helped Tom yesterday. You didn't think about whether it was proper or safe. You just saw someone who needed help and gave it. That tells me what kind of person you are. But marriage is more than helping someone with a cut leg." "Yes, it is. It's about building a life together, taking care of each other, making a family." Bear stopped walking and looked down at her. "I'm 34 years old, Miss Hartwell. I've been waiting for love to find me, but it hasn't happened. Maybe I'm too big or too quiet or too set in my ways, but I'm tired of being alone." Eleanor could hear loneliness in his deep voice, and it touched something in her heart. "I have a good ranch," Bear continued. "The house is comfortable with real glass windows and a stone fireplace. I don't drink too much, I don't gamble, and I've never hit a woman or child in my life. I can provide for you and any children we might have. What would you expect from me? Companionship. Someone to talk to at dinner. Someone who cares if I come home safe at night. He paused. And yes, children someday, if God blesses us. But I wouldn't force that on you. Eleanor studied his face. He seemed honest, and despite his size, there was gentleness in his manner. I heard that other women have turned you down. Bear nodded. 3 others. Sarah Miller said I was too big and scary. Emma Jones said she could never live so far from town. And Lucy Carter. He stopped. What did Lucy Carter say? She said I was too stupid to know that women want romance, not business arrangements. Eleanor almost smiled at his honest answer. Maybe she had a point. Maybe. But I don't know much about romance. I know about hard work and loyalty and taking care of what's mine. They had reached the small cemetery at the edge of town. Bear sat down on a wooden bench someone had placed under a large tree. Eleanor sat beside him, careful to keep proper distance between them. I heard the school won't open, Bear said. That's right. No money. What will you do? Eleanor sighed. I don't know. Look for work, I suppose. There's a job at the bank, but it doesn't pay much. You could do better than that. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching clouds move across the big Montana sky. If I said yes, Eleanor said carefully, what would happen next? We'd talk to Preacher Morrison, plan a simple wedding. You'd move to the ranch, and we'd start learning to live together. And if it doesn't work? If we make each other miserable? Bear considered this seriously. I suppose we'd have to try to make the best of it. Divorce is possible, but it's hard on a woman's reputation. Eleanor knew this was true. A divorced woman would have an even harder time finding work or acceptance in society. I need more time to think, she said. How much time? A few days. Bear stood up and offered her his arm for the walk back to town. Take all the time you need. But remember, I'm not the only man in Montana looking for a wife. If you wait too long, I might find someone else. Eleanor looked up at him, surprised. Was that a threat or just honesty? I mean, Bear added quickly, that good women are hard to find out here. I hope you'll consider my offer seriously. As they walked back toward town, Eleanor realized that she was already considering it more seriously than she wanted to admit. September came to Montana with cool mornings and golden afternoons. Eleanor had been living at the ranch for 3 weeks, and she was starting to find her place in this new world. Every morning, Bear left early to work with the cattle and his ranch hands. Eleanor spent her time learning to manage the big house, helping Maria with cooking and cleaning, and exploring the land around their home. She discovered that Bear had a vegetable garden behind the house where he grew corn, beans, and squash. My mother started this garden, he told her one evening. She said a ranch family should grow their own food when possible. Eleanor began tending the garden, finding peace in the simple work of watering plants and pulling weeds. She had never grown anything in Boston, but the plants seemed to respond to her care. In the evenings, Bear would come home tired and dirty from his work. He always cleaned up before dinner, and Eleanor learned to have hot water ready for him. They ate together and talked about their days, sharing small details that helped them understand each other better. Bear was not a man who talked much, but Eleanor learned to read his moods. When cattle prices were good, he hummed while he ate. When there were problems with sick animals or broken fences, he was quiet and thoughtful. She began offering him extra coffee on the difficult days, and he seemed to appreciate the kindness. One evening, Eleanor asked about his family. Tell me about your parents. Bear was quiet for a long moment. My father was even bigger than me. People used to joke that the McKinnon men were part giant. He was gentle, though, like a big dog that knows his own strength. And your mother? Small, like you, but tough as leather. She could stare down an angry bull or nurse a sick calf all night. She ran this house and kept my father and me in line. Eleanor could hear love and sadness in his voice. How did they die? Fever. It came through the area 5 years ago. Took them both within a week. Bear stared into his coffee cup. I buried them up on the hill behind the house where they can look over the ranch they built. I'm sorry. Thank you. What about your family? Eleanor told him about her parents' disappointment in her unmarried state and about her mother's long illness. I spent 2 years caring for her before she died. After that, my father made it clear that he couldn't support me forever. That must have been hard. It was. But it taught me that I could take care of myself if I had to. As the days passed, Eleanor began to notice things about Bear that surprised her. Despite his size and rough work, he was careful with small things. She watched him fix a broken bird's nest and gently return it to a tree. When one of his horses cut its leg on wire, he doctored it with the same gentle hands Eleanor had seen him use with people. The ranch hands respected Bear, but they also seemed to like him. Eleanor often heard them laughing at something he had said, and they came to him with both work problems and personal troubles. "The men trust you," Eleanor observed one evening. "A ranch is like a small family. Everyone has to work together or it doesn't succeed." Eleanor was also learning that Bear was smarter than his simple way of talking might suggest. He knew about weather patterns, animal behavior, and business. He read newspapers when he could get them, and often knew more about world events than Eleanor expected. One morning in early October, Eleanor woke up feeling sick to her stomach. She barely made it to the wash basin before she lost her dinner from the night before. The same thing happened the next morning, and the next. Maria noticed Eleanor's pale face at breakfast. "Señora, are you feeling well?" "Just a little tired." But Maria's knowing look made Eleanor think about other changes she had noticed in her body. Her monthly bleeding was late, and her breasts felt tender. Could she be pregnant already? That evening, Eleanor felt dizzy while helping with dinner. She sat down quickly and Bear noticed immediately. "Eleanor, what's wrong?" "I'm just tired." But as she stood up to clear the table, the room spun around her and she fainted. Bear caught her before she hit the floor, his strong arms holding her easily. "Maria, bring water," he called, his voice worried. Eleanor came back to herself lying on the parlor sofa with Bear kneeling beside her, his big hand gentle on her forehead. "How do you feel?" "Better. I think I just need rest." "I'm sending for the doctor." "No, Bear, I'm fine." But he was already putting on his coat. "Tom can ride to town and bring Doc Miller back. This is not something to ignore." Eleanor wanted to argue, but she was too tired. She dozed on the sofa until she heard horses outside. Bear came in with a small, bearded man carrying a black medical bag. "This is my wife, Eleanor," Bear said. "She fainted during dinner." Doc Miller was kind but thorough in his examination. He asked Eleanor questions about how she was feeling and when her symptoms had started. Finally, he smiled. "Mrs. McKinnon, you're not sick, you're going to have a baby." Eleanor's heart jumped. She looked at Bear, who was standing very still with a strange expression on his face. "Are you sure?" Eleanor asked. "Pretty sure. All the signs are there. You're probably about 6 weeks along." After the doctor left, Bear and Eleanor sat in the parlor, not talking. The news was wonderful and frightening at the same time. "How do you feel about it?" Eleanor asked finally. Bear looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. "Scared," he said honestly. "Happy, but scared." "Scared of what?" "Of being a good father. Of taking care of you both. My hands are so big. What if I hurt the baby?" Eleanor reached over and took one of his large hands in both of hers. These hands have never hurt anyone, they've only helped and healed. Bear squeezed her hands gently. "Are you happy about the baby?" Eleanor thought about it. "Yes, I think I am. It's sooner than I expected, but yes." "I wanted children," Bear said quietly. "I just hoped we'd have more time to know each other first. We'll learn together." That night, Bear walked Eleanor to her bedroom door as he did every evening. But this time he stopped and looked down at her seriously. "Eleanor, I know we married for practical reasons, but I want you to know I'm starting to care for you. Really care for you." Eleanor felt her heart flutter. "I care for you too, Bear." He bent down and kissed her gently, and this time, Eleanor kissed him back. When they separated, both of them were breathing a little faster. "Good night," Bear said softly. "Good night." As Eleanor got ready for bed, she put her hand on her still flat stomach and thought about the baby growing there. This marriage that had started as a business arrangement was becoming something more. She was starting to love this gentle giant of a man, and now they would have a child together. Outside her window, the first frost of autumn sparkled on the grass, and Eleanor smiled as she fell asleep. November brought the first real cold to the ranch, and Eleanor was getting used to the rhythm of ranch life. Her morning sickness had mostly passed, and she was starting to show the first small signs of her pregnancy. Bear had become even more protective, always making sure she didn't lift anything heavy or work too hard. One morning, Bear came in for breakfast looking troubled. His foreman, Jake Miller, was with him, and both men had worried expressions. "What's wrong?" Eleanor asked, pouring coffee for both men. "We lost about 20 head of cattle last night," Bear said. "Found tracks leading toward the Hartley Ranch." Eleanor had heard Bear mention the Hartley Ranch before, but never in a good way. "You think they stole your cattle?" Jake nodded. "Those Hartley boys have been making noise about how Bear's ranch is too big for one man to handle proper, especially now that he's got himself a mail-order bride to worry about." Eleanor felt her face get hot. Mail-order bride? Bear reached over and squeezed her hand. "Don't listen to that talk. People like to gossip." "But they did steal your cattle?" "I think so, but proving it is another matter." Over the next few days, more cattle went missing. Bear and his men rode out every morning to check fences and look for signs of thieves. Eleanor could see the worry in Bear's face, and she knew this was about more than just stolen animals. One evening, Jake brought disturbing news. "I was in town today, boss. Heard talk that some folks think you're too distracted by your new wife to protect your property proper. They're saying maybe someone tougher should take over some of your land." Bear's jaw got tight. "Who's saying that?" "Hartley and his sons, mostly. But others are listening." Eleanor felt angry. "They think because you got married, you're weak?" "Some people see kindness as weakness," Bear said. "And they think because I married you without much courting, our marriage isn't real." That night, Eleanor lay awake thinking about what Jake had said. She realized that their practical marriage was being used against Bear by men who wanted his land. The thought made her furious. The next morning, Bear was getting ready to ride out with his men when Eleanor stopped him. "I want to help." "Eleanor, you're pregnant. I won't have you in danger. I'm not talking about riding after cattle thieves, but there must be something I can do." Bear looked at her thoughtfully. "What do you have in mind?" "I don't know yet, but I won't sit here doing nothing while people try to hurt us." That afternoon, Eleanor asked Maria to take her to town. She wanted to understand what people were really saying about Bear and their marriage. At the general store, Eleanor heard exactly what she had expected. Mrs. Adams was holding court with several other women, talking about how Bear McKinnon had gotten too big for his britches. "That poor girl he married doesn't know what she's gotten herself into," Mrs. Adams said. "Living alone with that giant so far from town, and now with rustlers taking advantage of his distraction." Eleanor stepped forward. "Excuse me, Mrs. Adams. I couldn't help but overhear you talking about my husband and me." Mrs. Adams had the grace to look embarrassed. "Mrs. McKinnon, I didn't see you there. I heard what you said about Bear being distracted. I want you to know that my husband is the strongest, most capable man I've ever known. Anyone who thinks marriage has made him weak is going to be very surprised." "Well, of course, dear. I didn't mean. And as for our marriage not being real," Eleanor continued, her voice getting stronger, "I chose to marry Bear McKinnon because he's a good man who treats me with respect and kindness. That's more real than many marriages that started with fancy courtships." Eleanor turned to face the other women. "If people in this town have concerns about cattle rustling, they should be helping Bear catch the thieves, not spreading gossip about his personal life." With that, Eleanor walked out of the store with her head high, leaving the women staring after her. When Bear came home that evening, Eleanor told him what had happened in town. "You didn't need to defend me," he said, but she could see he was pleased. Yes, I did. We're married, Bear. That means we stand together. That night, their kiss goodnight lasted longer than usual, and Eleanor felt warmth spread through her body that had nothing to do with the fireplace. 2 days later, the conflict came to a head. Bear and his men had tracked the stolen cattle to a canyon on the edge of Hartley's property. When they confronted the rustlers, shooting started. Eleanor was in the kitchen making bread when she heard horses approaching fast. She looked out the window and saw Jake helping Bear down from his horse. Bear's shirt was torn and bloody. Eleanor ran outside. What happened? Just a graze, Bear said, but his face was pale. Bullet caught my shoulder. Eleanor and Maria got Bear into the house and onto the kitchen table so Eleanor could examine the wound. The bullet had cut a groove along the top of his shoulder, deep enough to bleed heavily but not deep enough to be dangerous. Hold still, Eleanor told him, cleaning the wound with whiskey. Bear gritted his teeth but didn't complain. Did you get the cattle back? Eleanor asked as she bandaged the wound. Most of them. And we caught 2 of Hartley's boys red-handed. Bear looked at her seriously. This isn't over, Eleanor. Hartley won't give up just because we caught his son stealing. Then we'll be ready for him. Bear smiled despite his pain. We, I told you, we stand together. That evening, as Eleanor helped Bear into bed, he caught her hand. Eleanor, I need to tell you something. What? I'm falling in love with you. Eleanor's heart jumped. She had been hoping to hear those words, but she was still surprised by how happy they made her. I love you too, she whispered. Bear pulled her down gently and kissed her with more passion than ever before. When they separated, both of them were breathing hard. Are you sure? Bear asked. About loving me? Eleanor answered by kissing him again, putting all her feelings into it. When they broke apart this time, Bear's eyes were dark with desire. Eleanor, I know what I want, she said softly. Despite his wounded shoulder, Bear was gentle as he pulled her onto the bed beside him. They made love for the first time with tenderness and growing passion, and afterward, Eleanor lay in Bear's arms feeling completely happy. No more separate bedrooms, Bear said, stroking her hair. No more separate anything, Eleanor agreed. Outside, wind rattled the windows and reminded them that winter was coming. But inside their warm bedroom, Eleanor and Bear held each other, close, and knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together as husband and wife in every sense of the words. Eleanor put her hand on her growing belly and smiled. Their child would be born into a family built on love, not just practical necessity. I love you, Bear McKinnon, she whispered. I love you too, Mrs. McKinnon, he replied. And Eleanor heard the joy in his deep voice. The next morning would bring new challenges, but tonight they had found something precious. Real love growing from the practical arrangement that had brought them together. December brought heavy snow to Montana, and Eleanor had never experienced a winter like it. Snow piled up to the windows, and the wind howled around the house like a living thing. But inside, the stone house was warm and cozy, and Eleanor felt safe with Bear's strong arms around her at night. Eleanor's pregnancy was showing clearly now, and she felt the baby move inside her for the first time on Christmas Eve. She was sitting by the fireplace mending one of Bear's shirts when she felt a flutter like butterfly wings in her belly. Bear, she called excitedly. He looked up from the book he was reading. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. The baby moved. She took his big hand and placed it on her rounded belly. Wait! There! Bear's eyes went wide as he felt the tiny kick against his palm. That's our baby? Eleanor laughed at the wonder in his voice. That's our baby. Bear kept his hand on her belly, hoping to feel more movement. His face was soft with amazement. How can something so small be so strong? It takes after its father. They had decorated a small Christmas tree that Bear had cut from their land, and Maria had taught Eleanor how to make special Christmas cookies. It was Eleanor's first Christmas as a married woman, and despite being far from any family, she felt more at home than she ever had in Boston. On Christmas morning, Bear gave Eleanor a beautiful shawl he had ordered from Helena. Eleanor gave him a new leather-bound journal where he could keep track of ranch business and his thoughts. "I noticed you like to write things down," she said. Bear smiled and kissed her. "You pay attention to everything, don't you?" "I pay attention to you." January brought the worst blizzard Eleanor had ever seen. Snow fell for 3 days straight, and the wind was so strong that Bear and his men couldn't even get to the barns to care for the animals. They were completely cut off from the outside world. On the second day of the storm, Eleanor started feeling sick again, but this time it wasn't morning sickness. She had a fever and could barely keep food down. Bear was worried sick. "I should get the doctor." "You can't get to town in this storm. No one can travel in this weather." Bear paced the bedroom like a caged animal. He had never felt so helpless. His wife was sick, she was carrying his child, and he couldn't do anything to help her. Eleanor's fever got higher during the night. She was burning hot 1 minute and shivering with cold the next. Bear stayed beside her bed, putting cool cloths on her forehead and trying to get her to drink water. "Tell me about your family," Eleanor whispered during one of her clearer moments. Bear thought she was trying to stay awake by talking. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. I want to know everything about you." So Bear talked through the long, dark hours. He told her about his grandfather who had come to Montana with nothing but a strong back and a dream. He told her about his grandmother, who had been tiny like Eleanor, but tough enough to survive anything. Grandfather was 8 feet tall. Bear said, "People used to cross the street when they saw him coming, but grandmother could make him mind with just a look." Eleanor smiled weakly. "Sounds familiar." He was afraid he would hurt her because he was so big, but she told him that gentleness comes from the heart, not the hands. Smart woman. She said big men like us are meant to protect people, not scare them. That's why God made us strong. Eleanor's fever broke on the 3rd day, just as the storm finally ended. Bear had not slept for 3 nights and he looked terrible. "You need rest," Eleanor told him. "I need to know you're going to be all right." Eleanor sat up carefully and took his face in her hands. "I'm going to be fine. We're both going to be fine." Bear collapsed onto the bed beside her and held her carefully as if she might break. "I was so scared," he whispered. "I thought I was going to lose you." "You're not getting rid of me that easily." As Eleanor got stronger, they talked more than they ever had before. The storm had trapped them together, but it had also given them time to really know each other. Eleanor learned that Bear was afraid people only respected him because of his size, not because of who he was inside. He worried that their children might inherit his size and face the same struggles he had. "People have always seen me as different," Bear told her. "Too big, too quiet, too serious. I never fit in anywhere." "You fit with me," Eleanor said simply. Bear learned that Eleanor had felt invisible in Boston, overlooked because she wasn't pretty enough or young enough to attract attention. "My family treated me like a burden," she said, "like I was taking up space that belonged to someone else." "You're not invisible to me," Bear replied. "You're the most important person in my world." By February, Eleanor was feeling strong again, and her belly was growing rounder every week. Bear had become even more protective, barely letting her lift anything heavier than a teacup. One snowy morning, Eleanor was helping Maria with laundry when she felt a sharp pain in her back. She ignored it, thinking she had just moved wrong. But the pain came again an hour later, stronger this time. "Senora," Maria said, noticing Eleanor's face, "are you having pains?" "A little. But it's too early. The baby isn't due for another 6 weeks." Maria looked worried. "Sometimes babies come early. We should tell Bear." But before Eleanor could answer, another pain hit. This one so strong it made her gasp and double over. "Bear!" Maria called loudly. Bear came running from the barn where he had been working. He took one look at Eleanor's pale face and knew something was very wrong. "The baby's coming too early," Eleanor gasped between pains. Fear filled Bear's eyes, but his voice stayed calm. "Maria, Ride to town and bring Doc Miller back as fast as you can. Tell him it's an emergency. Bear, what if something happens to the baby? Eleanor asked, scared. Bear knelt beside her and took her hands. Then we'll face it together, just like we've faced everything else. But our baby is strong, Eleanor. It's got your courage and your fighting spirit. The labor pains continued for hours. Bear stayed with Eleanor, holding her hand and talking to her softly. He was gentle and calm, even though she could see the worry in his eyes. Doc Miller finally arrived as the sun was setting. After examining Eleanor, he looked serious but not hopeless. The baby is coming early, but not dangerously early. 6 weeks might not be a problem. Eleanor's labor continued through the night. Bear never left her side, and when their son was finally born just before dawn, Bear was there to catch the tiny baby in his big hands. The baby was small but healthy, with a strong cry that filled the room. Doc Miller cleaned him up and handed him to Eleanor. "He's perfect," Eleanor whispered, counting 10 tiny fingers and 10 tiny toes. Bear stared at his son with wonder. The baby was so small in his arms, but he could already see that the child would be big like his father. "What should we name him?" Bear asked. Eleanor looked at her husband and their newborn son. "Samuel. It means God heard our prayers." "Samuel McKinnon," Bear said softly. "I like it," as Eleanor nursed their baby for the first time. Bear sat beside them on the bed, his arm around his wife and his finger gently touching his son's tiny hand. "I love you both so much," he said quietly. Eleanor leaned against Bear's shoulder, feeling perfectly happy despite being exhausted. "Our family," she said. "Our family," Bear agreed. Outside, spring was slowly coming to Montana, melting the snow and bringing new life to the land. Inside the warm ranch house, the McKinnon family was beginning their life together with love, hope, and the promise of many years ahead. Spring came to the Montana ranch with green grass and wildflowers, and baby Samuel was growing bigger and stronger every day. At 3 months old, he was already large for his age, and Bear loved to hold his son and sing to him in his deep, rumbling voice. Eleanor was happy taking care of Samuel and helping Bear with the ranch. She had learned to milk cows, gather eggs, and tend the vegetable garden. The work was hard, but she felt useful and needed in a way she never had in Boston. One warm day in May, Eleanor was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she saw a fancy carriage coming up the long road to the ranch. She didn't recognize it, but as it got closer, her heart sank. She knew that carriage style. It was the kind wealthy people from back east used. The carriage stopped in front of the house, and Eleanor watched in shock as her sister Margaret stepped down. Margaret was 5 years younger than Eleanor, with golden hair and a tiny waist. She was wearing an expensive traveling dress and a hat with feathers. "Eleanor," Margaret called out, looking around the ranch with obvious distaste. "My goodness, what have you done to yourself?" Eleanor walked over slowly, still holding the wet shirt she had been hanging. "Margaret, what are you doing here?" Margaret hugged her sister, but carefully, so she wouldn't wrinkle her dress. "I came to rescue you, of course. When Father got your letter about getting married to some farmer, we were all worried sick. He's not a farmer, he's a rancher, and I don't need rescuing." Margaret looked at the simple work dress Eleanor was wearing, and at her hands that were rough from ranch work. "Oh, Eleanor, look at you. You're living like a servant." Bear came walking up from the barn, and Margaret's eyes went wide when she saw how big he was. "You must be Margaret," Bear said politely, taking off his hat. "Eleanor talks about you often." Margaret stared up at Bear like he was a dangerous animal. "You're very large." Eleanor felt embarrassed by her sister's rude behavior. "Bear, this is my sister Margaret. She's visiting from Boston." "Any family of Eleanor's is welcome here," Bear said kindly. "You must be tired from traveling. Come inside and rest." But Margaret kept staring at Bear with fear and disgust. Eleanor could see what her sister was thinking, that Bear was too big, too rough, too different from the gentleman back in Boston. At dinner that night, Margaret picked at Maria's good food and asked pointed questions. "Eleanor, surely you miss proper society, theater, concerts, intelligent conversation?" We have plenty of intelligent conversation here, Eleanor replied. Margaret looked at Bear, who was quietly eating his dinner. What do you think about the new book by Henry James, Mr. McKinnon? Bear looked up. I haven't read it. I prefer history and science books to novels. Margaret smiled like she had proven a point. I see. Eleanor felt angry at her sister's condescending tone. Bear reads more than anyone I know. He's taught me about ranching, weather patterns, and animal behavior. That's useful knowledge. After dinner, Bear excused himself to check on the cattle, giving the sisters time to talk alone. Eleanor, you can't be serious about staying here, Margaret said as soon as Bear was gone. This man is practically a giant. Aren't you afraid he'll hurt you? Bear has never hurt anyone in his life. He's the gentlest man I know. But Eleanor, look at this place. You're living in the wilderness, doing manual labor, married to a man who barely speaks. This isn't the life you were meant for. Eleanor picked up baby Samuel, who had started fussing. This is exactly the life I was meant for. Margaret watched Eleanor nurse the baby. The child is going to be huge, isn't he? Like his father. What, if he is? Eleanor, think about what you're doing to your children. They'll never fit into civilized society. They'll be freaks just like their father. Eleanor stood up so quickly that Margaret stepped back. Don't you ever call my husband or my son freaks. Bear is worth 10 of the so-called gentlemen back in Boston. Margaret's voice got softer, more persuasive. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. But Eleanor, I have good news. Remember Robert Fletcher? He's always admired you. His wife died last winter and he's looking for someone to help raise his children. He specifically asked Father about you. Eleanor remembered Robert Fletcher, a boring banker with a big house and no personality. He wants to hire me as a nanny? He wants to marry you. You could come back to Boston, have a proper house in a good neighborhood, send your children to real schools. I'm already married. Marriages can be dissolved, especially marriages like yours that were clearly made under desperate circumstances. Eleanor felt like her sister had slapped her. You want me to divorce my husband and abandon my home? I want you to come back where you belong, with people who understand you. That night, Eleanor lay in bed next to Bear, too upset to sleep. Bear seemed to sense her mood. Your sister doesn't like me much, he said quietly. She doesn't understand you. Maybe she's right, though. Maybe you would be happier back in Boston with people like you. Eleanor turned to look at Bear in the moonlight. People like me? Educated people, refined people, people who know about books and art and proper manners. Eleanor could hear the pain in Bear's voice, and it made her angry all over again. Bear McKinnon, you listen to me. I am happier here with you than I ever was in Boston. I love you. I love our son, and I love our life together. But what if she's right? What if Samuel grows up feeling out of place because he's different? Eleanor sat up and took Bear's face in her hands. Different isn't bad, Bear. You taught me that. Samuel will grow up knowing he's loved, and that's what matters. The next morning, Margaret tried a different approach. She offered to take Eleanor and Samuel back to Boston for just a visit. You could see Father, show him his grandson, just for a few weeks. Eleanor was tempted. She did miss some things about Boston, and she wanted her father to meet Samuel. What, do you think? She asked Bear. Bear was quiet for a long moment. If you want to go, you should go. But Eleanor could see the fear in his eyes. The fear that if she left, she might not come back. I don't want to leave you. It might be good for you to see your old life again. Make sure this is really what you want. Eleanor realized that Bear was giving her a choice. The same kind of honest, practical choice he had given her when he first proposed. He was willing to let her go, even though it would hurt him, because he wanted her to be happy. That afternoon, Eleanor was in the garden with Samuel when she heard shouting from near the barn. She looked up and saw Bear and his men surrounding a pack of wolves that had come down from the mountains. The wolves were after the chickens, but they were also dangerously close to the house. Eleanor grabbed Samuel and ran toward the house, but she slipped and fell, the baby flying from her arms. Samuel landed in the soft dirt and started crying. Eleanor tried to get up, but her ankle was twisted and painful. The largest wolf had noticed her and was moving in her direction, attracted by Samuel's cries. Eleanor tried to crawl toward her baby, but the wolf was faster. It was almost to Samuel when a gunshot rang out. Bear had shot the wolf, but he was too far away to reach Eleanor and Samuel before the other wolves closed in. Without thinking, Eleanor grabbed a heavy stick and put herself between the wolves and her baby. "Get back," she yelled, swinging the stick. The wolves hesitated, confused by this small woman who was willing to fight them. That moment of hesitation was all Bear needed. He reached Eleanor and Samuel, scooping them both up in his strong arms. The other ranch hands drove off the remaining wolves, and Bear carried Eleanor and Samuel safely to the house. "Are you hurt?" Bear asked, checking Eleanor and the baby carefully. "My ankle is twisted, but Samuel's fine." Bear held them both close, his hands shaking slightly. "When I saw that wolf near you and Samuel, I thought I might lose you both." Eleanor looked into Bear's eyes and saw not just fear, but deep, desperate love. This man would do anything to protect her and their child. He had proven it over and over again. That evening, as Bear was bandaging Eleanor's ankle, Margaret watched with a strange expression. "You really love them, don't you?" Margaret asked Bear. Bear looked up from Eleanor's foot. "More than my own life." Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she turned to Eleanor. "And you love him?" "Yes." Margaret sighed. "I don't understand it, but I can see it's real." The next morning, Margaret announced she was returning to Boston. "Alone?" Eleanor asked. "Yes. I came here thinking I was rescuing you from a terrible mistake, but I was wrong." Margaret looked at Bear, who was gently playing with Samuel. "He's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone cruel or stupid, or taking advantage of you. But he's not any of those things. He loves you, Eleanor." "Really, loves you?" Margaret hugged Eleanor goodbye. "Write to Father, let him know you're happy. Maybe someday he'll understand." As the carriage disappeared down the road, Bear came up behind Eleanor and put his arms around her. "No regrets?" he asked. Eleanor leaned back against his chest and watched their son playing in the grass. "Only that it took me so long to realize what I had." "What do you have?" Eleanor turned in his arms and smiled. "Everything." 2 years had passed since Margaret's visit, and the McKinnon Ranch had grown and prospered. Samuel was now a sturdy 2-year-old with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. He was already tall for his age, and Bear loved to carry him around the ranch, showing him the cattle and horses. Eleanor was pregnant again, and this time she felt confident and happy about it. She had learned so much about life on the ranch, and she knew she could handle whatever came next. On a warm summer morning, Eleanor was teaching a group of children in the shade of a big oak tree near the house. Word had spread that Mrs. McKinnon was an educated woman who could teach reading and writing, and parents from neighboring ranches had started bringing their children for lessons. There was Mary Peterson, 8 years old, who rode 5 miles with her father twice a week to learn letters. There was young Tom Wilson, whose father was Bear's foreman. Tom was learning his numbers so he could help keep track of cattle. There were also 3 orphaned children that Bear and Eleanor had taken in over the past year. Jenny, age 7, Billy, age 9, and little Rose, who was only 4. Bear had not hesitated when each child needed a home. "We have room," he would say simply, "and children need families." Eleanor loved watching Bear with all the children. Despite his huge size, he was patient and gentle. He could fix broken toys with his big hands, tell exciting stories about ranch, life, and comfort scared children with his quiet voice. Samuel toddled around the outdoor classroom, chattering to himself in the mixture of English and Spanish he had learned from Maria. He was fascinated by everything and everyone, just like his parents. "Mrs. McKinnon," Mary Peterson asked, "why do we need to learn reading if we're just going to be ranch wives?" Eleanor smiled. "Learning makes you stronger, Mary. It helps you understand the world and make good decisions. Besides, who says you have to be just a ranch wife? You could be anything you want." After the lesson ended, Eleanor sat in the grass with Samuel while the other children played. Her hand rested on her growing belly, and she felt the new baby kick. Bear came walking up from the barn, smiling when he saw his little family. He sat down next to Eleanor and pulled Samuel onto his lap. "How was school today, teacher?" Bear asked. "Good. Mary is reading whole sentences now, and Billy solved all his math problems." "And our boy?" Eleanor laughed and pointed to Samuel, who was trying to eat grass. "Our boy spent the lesson chasing butterflies and trying to pet a bee." Bear chuckled and gently took the grass out of Samuel's mouth. "He's got plenty of time to learn." That evening, after all the children were in bed, Bear and Eleanor sat on their front porch watching the sunset. The mountains in the distance turned purple and gold, and cattle moved slowly across the pasture. "Do you ever think about that day, in the general store?" Eleanor asked. "When you asked me to marry you in front of everyone?" Bear smiled. "I think about it all the time. I still can't believe you said yes. I almost didn't." "What changed your mind?" Eleanor thought about it. "I was desperate, but that wasn't the only reason. There was something about you that felt safe and honest. You didn't try to charm me or lie to me. You just told me exactly what you wanted and what you could offer." "I needed a wife and you needed strong sons," Bear said, repeating his words from that long-ago day. Eleanor laughed. "Well, you certainly gave me strong sons, and daughters too now." They sat quietly for a while, listening to the peaceful sounds of evening on the ranch. "Bear, do you remember what you said about love coming later?" "Yes, you were right, but I don't think either of us expected it to be this strong." Bear reached over and took her hand. "I love you more every day, Eleanor. You made me believe I could have a real family. You gave me a real home. And a purpose." Samuel came toddling out onto the porch in his nightclothes, dragging his favorite blanket. "Papa, story," he demanded, climbing onto Bear's lap. Bear settled Samuel comfortably and began telling him about the brave horses who helped the cowboys keep the cattle safe. Eleanor listened with a smile, thinking about how much their lives had changed. The scared, desperate teacher who had stepped off that stagecoach 3 years ago was gone. In her place was a confident ranch wife and mother who knew her own worth. She could deliver a baby, treat sick animals, teach children, and stand up to anyone who threatened her family. The lonely giant who had made such a bold proposal in the general store was gone too. In his place was a husband and father who had found his place in the world. After Bear put Samuel to bed, he and Eleanor walked around their property in the moonlight. They checked on the horses, looked at Eleanor's vegetable garden, and visited the graves of Bear's parents on the hill behind the house. "Your parents would be proud," Eleanor said, putting flowers on their graves. "I think they would like you," Bear replied, "and they would love their grandchildren." As they walked back to the house, Eleanor thought about all the changes in their lives. The ranch was bigger and more successful. Bear had earned the respect of everyone in the territory as a fair and honest businessman. Eleanor's school had grown so much that the town was talking about building a real schoolhouse and hiring her as the official teacher. Most importantly, their marriage had become exactly what Bear had predicted, a partnership built on respect, trust, and love that grew stronger every year. "Bear," Eleanor said as they reached the front door, "I need to tell you something." "What?" "I got a letter from my father yesterday." Bear stopped walking. Eleanor's father had never written since she left Boston. "What did he say?" Margaret told him about her visit here. "About you, about Samuel, about our life." Eleanor smiled. "He wants to come see us. He wants to meet his son-in-law and his grandchildren." Bear looked worried. "What if he doesn't like what he sees?" Eleanor stood on her toes and kissed Bear gently. "Then that's his loss. But I think he'll see what Margaret saw, that you're a good man who loves his family." 6 months later, Eleanor gave birth to a healthy daughter they named Grace. Like Samuel, she was big for her age and showed signs of inheriting the McKinnon size and strength. Eleanor's father did visit, and after his initial shock at Bear's size, he came to respect and even like his unusual son-in-law. He was amazed by the life Eleanor had built and proud of the woman she had become. "You were right to come here. he told Eleanor before he left. "This is where you belong." Years passed, and the McKinnon Ranch became known throughout Montana as a place where children could get an education and where anyone in need could find help. Bear and Eleanor had 2 more children of their own and adopted several more orphans over the years. Samuel grew up to be even bigger than his father, but gentle like Bear had always been. Grace became a teacher like her mother, but also learned to run cattle like her father. All the McKinnon children knew they were loved and valued, no matter how big or different they might be. One evening, 25 years after that first meeting, in the general store, Bear and Eleanor sat on their porch watching their grown children and grandchildren play in the yard. Eleanor's hair was gray now and Bear's beard was white, but their love was as strong as ever. "Do you ever regret it?" Bear asked, the same question he had asked many times over the years. Eleanor smiled and took his hand. "Never. Not once." "I need a wife and you need strong sons," Bear said quietly, remembering. "And we both got everything we needed," Eleanor replied, "and so much more than we ever dreamed." As the sun set over the Montana mountains, Bear McKinnon held his wife close and thought about the miracle of their life together. He had asked for a practical arrangement and received the greatest love story of his life. And Eleanor, watching their family around them, knew that sometimes the best things come from the most unexpected beginnings. She had thought she was accepting a business deal, but she had found her true home and the love of her life. Their story had started with a bold proposition in a frontier town, but it had become a legacy of love, family, and the courage to build something beautiful together.